The Voice of the Drum, from The Drum in Unto Dust by Herman Bosman. Old Mosigu was the last of the drum men left at Gaborone, Scout Lawrence said, when they brought the telegraph wires on long poles to this part of the country. But there was a time when the voice of the drum travelled right across Africa. The peculiar thing about this was that even when a message originated from a tribe with a completely alien language, the drum man of the tribe receiving the message could still interpret it. In the old days, there were 2 drum men in each village. They were instructed in the code of the drum from boyhood, and then, in their turn, they taught the art of sending and receiving drum messages to those who came after them. No white man has ever been able to learn the language of the drum. The only one who ever had any idea at all, and even his knowledge was of the slightest, was Gerhardus van Tonder, who regularly travelled deep into Africa with his brother Roy Willem. Gerhardus van Tonder told me that he had asked the drum men of several tribes to teach him the meaning of the sounds they beat out on their tom-toms. But I could never understand what the drum men tried over and over again to explain to me. Gerhardus van Tonder said to me, even when a drum man repeated the same thing up to 10 times, I still couldn't grasp it. So thick-skulled are they. Nevertheless, Gerhardus said that because he had heard the same message so often, he was able later on to understand whenever the drums broadcast the message that his brother Roy Willem had shot an elephant dead. But one day, an elephant trampled Roy Willem to death. Gerhardus had listened to the message the drums had sent out after that. It was exactly the same as all earlier messages, Gerhardus said. Only it was the other way round. Even in those days, the prestige of the drum man had fallen considerably because a mission station had been started at Gaborone, and the missionaries had brought with them their own message, which came into conflict with the more heathen news from Central Africa. But when the telegraph wires were brought up from Cape Town, taken past the Groot Mariku, and erected in the Protectorate, everyone knew that, so to speak, the days of the drum man were numbered. Yet on one occasion, when I spoke to Mosigu about the telegraph, what he had to say was this: the drum man is better than the copper wire that you white men bring on poles across the world. I don't need copper wire for my drum's message, or long poles with rows of little white medicine bottles on them either. But whatever Mosigu thought, the authorities had brought the copper wires as far as Nietverdient. A little post office had then been built on Yuri Becker's farm, and a young telegraph operator from Pretoria had been appointed to serve as postmaster. This young man had arranged for a colleague in Pretoria to telegraph to him, from time to time, items from the newspapers. By means of these telegrams, which were pinned up on a notice board in the post office, we who lived in this part of the bushveld kept in touch with the outside world. The telegrams were all very short. In one of them, we read about President Kruger's visit to Johannesburg and what he said at a public meeting about the Uitlanders. If that's all that the president could say about the Uitlanders, Hans Grobler said, namely, that they are a pest, stop, and that they should be more heavily taxed, stop, and that a miner's procession through bottles, stop, then I think I'll vote for General Joubert at the next elections. And why do these telegrams always repeat the word stop so monotonously? Those of us who were in the post office at the time agreed with Hans Grobler. We said, moreover, that not only did we need a better president, we also needed a better telegraph operator. And we agreed that extending the telegraph service to Nuutverdiep had been a waste of hundreds of miles of copper wire, not to speak even of all those long poles. When we mentioned this to the telegraph operator, he looked from one to the other of us thoughtfully for a few moments. Then he said, Yes, I think it has been a waste. But look at this telegram, Hans Grobler interjected, about the fanatic who fired at the King of Spain, stop, and missed him by less than 2 feet, stop. What use is a message like that to us Bushveld Boers? And what sort of a thing is a fanatic anyway? As a result of these conversations at the post office, I decided to look up old Mosigo, the last of the drummen at Gaborone. I found him sitting in front of his hut. The wrinkles on his face were countless. They made me think of the footpaths that go twisting across the length and breadth of Africa, and that you can follow for mile after mile, and day after day, and that never come to an end. And I thought of how the messages that Mosigo received through his drum came from somewhere along those farthest paths across Africa. He was busy thumping his old drum. It sounded almost like a voice to me. Now and again it seemed as if there floated on the wind a sound from very far away, which was either an answer to Mosigo's message or the echo of his drum. But it wasn't like in the old days, when you could clearly hear how the message of one drum was taken up and spread over koppies and vlaktes by other drums. Anyone could see that there were not so many drummen left in the Bushveld, and the reduction in their numbers wasn't because the chiefs had thrown them to the vultures for bringing bad news. More likely, it was due to the competition from the white man's telegraph wires. Looking at Mosigo's wrinkles, I thought that he must have more understanding of things than that young upstart of a telegraph operator, who had only been out of school for 3 or 4 years at the most, and who always put the word stop in the middle of a message, a clear sign of his general uncertainty. So I told Mosigo that the telegraph was still quite a new thing, and that it might improve with time. Perhaps it would improve considerably, I said, if, for a start, they sacked that young telegraph operator at Nuutverdiep. That young telegraph operator was too impertinent, I said. Mosigo agreed that it would help. It was a very important thing, he said, that for such work you should have the right sort of person. It was no good, he explained, having news told to you by a man who was not suited to that kind of work. And another thing that is important is having the right person to tell the news to, Mosigo went on. And you must also consider well, considering whom the news is about. Take that king now, of whom you have told me that you heard of at Nitverdient through the telegraph. He is a great chief, that king, is he not? I said to Mosigo that I should imagine that he must be a great chief, the king of Spain. I couldn't know for sure, of course. You never really can with foreigners. Has he many herds of cattle and many wives hoeing the bean fields? Mosigo asked. Do you know him well, this great chief? I told Mosigo that I did not know the King of Spain to speak to, since I had never met him. But if I did meet him, I was going to explain when Mosigo said that that was exactly what he meant. What's the use of hearing about a man, he asked, unless you know who that man is? When the telegraph operator told you about that big chief, he told it to the wrong man. And he fell to beating his drum again. From then on, I went regularly to visit Mosigo in order to find out what was happening in the world. We still read what was on the notice board in the post office, for instance, about what had happened in Russia, where a fanatic had opened fire on the emperor and missed him by 1 foot stop. We began to infer from the telegrams that a fanatic was someone who couldn't aim very well. But to get news that really meant something, I always had to go afterwards and visit Mosigo. Thus it happened one afternoon when I visited old Mosigo on my way back from the post office, that I again found him sitting in front of his hut before his drum. He told me that there would be no more news coming over his drum because of a message about the death of a drum man that he had just received. It was a message from a great distance, he said. Still, the following week I again rode over to Gaborone. It was after I had read the telegram on the notice board in the post office, which said that a fanatic had missed the French president by more than 20 feet stop. And when I rode away from Gaborone, where this time I had not seen Mosigo, but had seen instead his drum, on which the skin stretched across the wooden frame had been cut in accordance with a ritual carried out on the death of a drum man, I wondered to myself on my way home. I wondered whether that last message, received by old Mosigo, had come from a really great distance, farther even than Spain or France or Russia. Stop.